In this video, I'm going to talk to you about how your unhealed trauma is most likely the cause of whatever problems you may be having. So, if you've chronically struggled with issues like anxiety, depression, rage, unhealthy relationships, addiction, passivity, or even extraterrestrial and paranormal attacks, I'm here to tell you that about 95% of the time, in my experience working with people, all these different problems are really mostly just symptoms. And once we learn to address the root of the problem, which is our unhealed trauma, all the rest of these symptoms essentially disappear. Now, I like to keep things simple because life is crazy enough. I don't need to waterboard you with a bunch of technical details and a bunch of psychological jargon. I want to give you a simple but powerful framework that helps you to easily understand and overcome the destructive behavior that may be slowly ruining your life and the lives of those around you. Now, in future videos, I'm going to give you techniques to heal these issues. But first, before we dive in on how to fix it, we first need to understand why these symptoms happen. Otherwise, the core issue of trauma will just keep repeating itself in different ways throughout your life, no matter how much yoga or meditation or detoxing or Tony Robbins seminars you go to. We have to go to the core first. So here we go. Let's start first by getting a basic behavioral understanding of your unconscious mind, because the unconscious mind controls the majority of your thoughts and behavior. Fundamentally speaking, it's a beautiful construct. It's evolved over hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years, in order to, fundamentally speaking, take you from danger and bring you towards safety. Okay? That's its job. It's meant to keep you safe. It's meant to take you away from the big bad saber-toothed tiger and the scary places of the jungle and get you towards the other monkeys where the bananas are located and life is good. That's its job. And the trouble with it is that it hasn't adapted and evolved as quickly as technology, as our modern life. And so we've become very complex, and society has become extremely complex. And it doesn't have the capability to often adapt in a healthy way. So when trauma happens, and happens often nowadays, we default into one of the four stress responses, okay? But first, let's talk about what trauma is, because we need to understand and identify. Trauma is when we have a breaking of our boundaries, either physically or emotionally, on some level, the breaking of our boundaries. And when we don't have the social support and the emotional attunement, and the right relational strategies to help us overcome that trauma and to heal quickly. Also, and the physical release to release that trauma that often gets stored in our bodies. It comes out in distorted ways and it messes with us and it destroys our lives in one of these four ways. And I'm going to run them through these real quick just to give you an overview so you can understand maybe where you fall on this spectrum and so you can understand your tendency. First, we have the fight response. We have anger issues and perfectionism. This is the tendency to push yourself externally, assert your will, and force things away from you and just, try to control things externally. Some people may say, well, what about, I thought anger is an emotion. Isn't that healthy to express your anger? Well, of course it is, but we can't stop there. Anger is just the protector of sadness. Okay, and I've dealt with anger issues. This is one of my favorite all my life. I love confronting anger in myself and with others because I understand it. It's the guardian of sadness, right? So we can't stop at anger. We can't stop at wanting to control things. We have to learn to surrender and go within. Next, we have the flight response. We have anxiety, dissociation, addiction, isolation, and fear of commitment. A lot of people have this because it's easier to just disengage and to run away and be in your own little world with your own subjective fantasies of how things may be. And that is, unfortunately, something that's very popular nowadays, especially with our smartphones and technology. We can just run away into a land of fantasy. Next, we have the fawn response. So we have people-pleasing, codependency, and social butterflies. This is the tendency for us to lose ourselves in the other. Okay, so we negate ourselves and we seek validation and some sort of sense of being in the other. Okay, when we have the social butterfly, I just want to talk about this real quick. When we have a social butterfly, some people say, well, we're social animals. Aren't we supposed to like hang out and be groovy with each other? Yes, but again, not at the negation of our true selves. Oftentimes people put on a false personality in order to fit in and flood themselves with good feelings, but then they just bury everything else underneath them, and they wind up creating an entirely false life where people like them for this false image of who they are, and it creates this psychological schism, and you can't run from that. Eventually it's going to blow. It's going to create a fault line in your life that's going to just completely erupt. Last but not least, we have the freeze response. We have depression, playing it small in life, procrastination, the victim mentality, and toxic passivity. So here we have a shutting down of the self, just a completely relinquishing of all responsibility, relinquishing of all ambition, or even just acknowledgement of the self. It's just shutting down. Close it out. No matter where you fall on one of these 4 quadrants of the stress response, underneath it all is emotional numbing. That's at the core of all trauma. It doesn't feel safe enough to feel all that trauma. The unconscious shuts it down. And the longer this goes on, the longer it's going to cause damage. In fact, if you look it up, I believe it's the amygdala that shrinks, where amygdala or hippocampus, I'm pretty sure it's the amygdala, but it shrinks under compounded stress, and that can cause issues later on. I'll let you look into it. We can do a video on that later. But in emotional numbing, the tendency is to go towards one end of the spectrum, okay? We have self-negation over here and narcissism over here, okay? So we have shutting down the emotions and then creating a false persona over there. Self-negation, narcissism. And with emotional numbing, you will eventually get a lack of embodiment too, because the mind and the body are connected. You can't separate the two. With the lack of embodiment, you're going to get physical ailments as well. Your body's going to be like, hey, listen, I'm your unconscious. You need to pay attention to me. And it's going to create physical ailments. You're going to get pain either in your muscles because of your chronic tension of holding your body in certain ways. You may just get hormonal imbalances or some other deficiency or ailment that's going to catch up with you, okay? Also, with a lack of embodiment, psychologically speaking, you're going to see a tendency to value the more masculine values of doing. You can see people being in their head, right? They're up here in the mentality of like, I must do these things, and they're constantly, either living in the future or they're running from the past, and they're never in the present moment. They are never in their feminine element of being, right? They don't feel their body. Philip Shepard has an amazing book. It's called New Self, New World, and then there's another one called Radical Wholeness. I really recommend his work. He talks about the feminine essence of being and the masculine element of doing, and how we've abandoned the feminine element of being. And we see this in society too. We live in the abstract, the conceptual, the digital, and we've forsaken the real and the physical. We glorify the economy, yet we completely neglect the environment. So it's a systemic issue. We see it reflected in all elements of life because of neglected trauma. We have this lack of embodiment. We also have pathological sexuality as well. So you see a lot of people with porn addiction. You see people with fetishism, like BDSM, a lot of guilt and shame in sexuality, people getting off on that and hurting other people as well. So all these things are related to trauma because there's no escaping it. It's all just one system. So if there's something wrong with your trauma, with your behavior, it's going to come out in other ways. Last but not least, we have spiritual weakness, okay? So if you have trauma that's unresolved, you cannot be spiritually attuned. You cannot be in the fullness of your spiritual alignment. Okay, you need to heal. You're going to see people who get spirit attachments, because their aura is not strong. They are very weakened, and what they do is, instead of confronting their trauma, a lot of what they do is something called spiritual bypassing. So to avoid negative feelings, negative emotions, or anything they may consider negative, they just try to flood themselves with the positive. And this is, again, terrible because it creates a disconnection in your body. So if you've experienced any of these and you resonate with any of it, know that you don't need to constantly just fixate on managing the symptoms, right? You need to go to the cause. You need to go to regulating your trauma. You need to learn about embodiment and emotional regulation, and perhaps some spiritual practices as well. But really, at the core of it all is trauma. And once you knock out this core issue, it's going to take out, again, like 90-95% of what it is that's going on with you. And it's going to make it so much better and more manageable. So thank you very much for listening. I hope this was really helpful and instructive. Look forward to more videos about how to overcome all this. If you like, please give us a like and a subscribe at the bottom. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.